Trump called security to kick Jasmine Crockett out, but she speaks. First, shocking. Everyone. Trump called for security the moment Jasmine Crockett walked in. But before they reached her, she spoke just 60 seconds, and the entire room changed. It was supposed to be just another summit, another headline-filled event, another crowd of loyalists, reporters, and critics quietly elbowing for position. In the back rows, the Lone Star Leadership Forum at the Kay Bailey Hutchison Convention Center in Dallas had been circled on political calendars for weeks, not because anything groundbreaking was expected to happen, but because Donald Trump was set to speak, and anytime Trump takes a mic, things don't usually go according to plan. The lobby buzzed early that morning with campaign volunteers in navy suits, press lanyards, slapping against their chests as they hurried past security and vendors pushing pro-Trump merch. By the table load, red hats, t-shirts, even a gold-plated bobblehead of the man himself. The ballroom doors opened late, and still the place packed fast. Every seat taken, some attendees stood near the walls. Craning their necks for a better view of the stage, the crowd was mixed in its own way. Not ideologically, but generationally retired. Oil workers sat beside Zoom-era influencers, live streaming straight from their phones. Some came for policy, some came for the spectacle. All came expecting Trump to do what he always did, control the room, own the story, and take no prisoners backstage. The air was reportedly tight. Rumors were already circulating that a few members of Congress might make unplanned appearances. Security had quietly doubled with plainclothes, agents lining the exits, and the perimeter of the stage. Then the lights dimmed. A voice announced him like a ring announcer in Vegas. Please, welcome the 45th President of the United States. Donald J. Trump. He walked out slow. One hand raised like a prize fighter, that familiar grin plastered on his face. The applause was deafening, but not quite universal. A few scattered voices near the back. Didn't clap. One man coughed loudly in protest. Another turned his back. Trump took his time walking to the podium, surveying the room like it belonged to him. He cracked a few lines about Biden, poked fun at California's drought policies, and made a jab about electric vehicles, all before even mentioning the summit's actual topic, state sovereignty and federal policy. Then it happened. A figure emerged from the side of the room, not from the stage entrance, or from the rows of seated guests from the press corridor near the right-hand wall in a white blazer and tan heels. Calm, silent, composed, it took a few seconds for the crowd to recognize her. Some squinted. One woman near the front gasped and whispered. Her name is that's Jasmine Crockett. Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas's 30th district, had made waves recently for her sharp questioning in committee hearings and her unapologetic manner during interviews. She was outspoken, quick-witted, and not one to play it safe, but no one expected to see her here. Especially not walking in alone while Trump was mid-sentence. Trump spotted her instantly. His speech faltered. What's going on here? He asked into the mic, peering across the stage with a mix of confusion and irritation. Did we invite her? The crowd rumbled, phones went up. Security turned sharply in her direction. Crockett didn't flinch. She walked a few more steps in and stopped midway down the side aisle. Not pushing forward, but clearly not backing out, either. A few attendees started murmuring loudly. One man in a stars and stripes tie pointed toward the exit and shouted, "You don't belong here." Trump leaned back from the mic and waved toward the side stage crew. "Someone take care of that," he said. "She's not supposed to be here." A few security personnel broke from the sidewall and started walking her way. Crockett raised her hand. Not like a protester. Not like a politician. But simply palm up as if signaling she wanted to speak. "I just want 1 minute," she said loud enough to reach the mic-less silence of the hall. 1 minute, and I'll leave. It was like the air had gone still. No one moved. Trump hesitated, his hand frozen halfway between pointing and dropping a few. In the crowd, muttered one woman, nervously adjusted her phone, still recording. But something about the calm in her voice made people pause. Instead of panic for a moment, it looked like security would ignore her request. The two men in black suits kept walking, one with a small earpiece pressed tightly in the other, scanning the faces nearby for any signs of backup or threat. The room still hadn't decided how to react. Was she a disruption? Was this a stunt? Or was it something else entirely? Jasmine Crocker stood her ground, not rigid, not theatrical, just steady. She kept her eyes fixed on Trump, but didn't look hostile. There was a calmness in the way she held herself, like she had walked into that room not to shout or perform, but to be seen, and more importantly, to be heard. I was invited, she said this time, directing her voice to the audience. Not just the stage by a representative, Ethan Bell, who couldn't make it today. He said it would be valuable to observe the discussion firsthand. Someone from the media pit shouted, "Do you have proof of that?" But Crockett didn't respond. She turned back toward Trump. "You say you want open dialogue?" she said. "Let me give you just 60 seconds of mine." The two security guards slowed, clearly unsure of whether to proceed. One glanced toward the side curtain, waiting for a signal. Meanwhile, Trump looked down at the crowd, then back at Crockett. He tilted his head. "This isn't your platform," he said into the mic. "You're not on the program. You weren't cleared. You want 60 seconds. Get a podcast?" Laughter rolled through parts of the room. A few people clapped, nodding in agreement. But Crockett wasn't flustered. She didn't smile, didn't smirk. She turned briefly toward the audience. "I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here because I still believe this country belongs to all of us. Not just the people we agree with." That landed harder than expected. A few people went quiet. Others started recording again. Trump stepped away from the podium, gesturing impatiently. "I'm not doing this," he muttered off. Mike waving to the security team again. "Just get her out." One of the guards took another step forward, then an older woman, gray hair pressed denim jacket, front row, stood up. "Let her speak?" She said it, plain. Not angry, not dramatic. Just enough for others to hear. Then a man 3 rows back echoed, "Yeah, let her talk." The wave wasn't huge, maybe 6 or 7 voices total, but it was enough to stall everything. Enough to throw the moment off script. Trump squinted toward the crowd. Really, we're going to let someone crash a stage and call it free speech. But there was no real pushback now. Too many phones were out. Too many people filming. This was no longer a controlled stage. It had become a public moment. Finally, with visible reluctance, Trump waved his hand toward the mic. "All right, fine," he said. "You've got 1 minute. Go ahead, say something smart." He stepped to the side. Security stopped. Crockett didn't rush the stage. She walked slowly toward the front, stopping a few feet from the steps. She didn't try to take the podium instead. She turned toward the audience and clasped her hands together. "I'm not going to talk policy," she began. "Not today, because this isn't about policy anymore. It's about people, how we talk to each other, how we stop listening." Once we hear the other side's name, she took a breath, scanning the room. "I grew up 10 minutes from here. South Dallas. I used to ride the Dart to school and pass this convention center every day. Never imagined I'd be standing inside it, asking for the right to speak." Some people leaned forward. Now, others sat frozen, unsure where this was going. "I'm not here to convince you of anything," she continued. "I don't expect applause, and I don't need agreement. I just want people to remember. We're not enemies. We're not strangers. We're Americans. And if we can't tolerate a voice in the room that challenges us, we've already lost more than an election." There was silence. Not awkward silence. Just still. Even Trump didn't cut in his arms or crossed expression. Unreadable. Someone near the back muttered something under their breath, but no one followed. Crockett looked around once more, gave a small nod, and took a single step back. That's all I wanted to say, but the room wasn't quite ready to move on. The silence was thick, not tense, but weighty. Like everyone was trying to process what just happened. A few people blinked at each other, uncertain whether to clap argue, or just stay quiet in a room where interruptions and grandstanding were common. Something about her calmness disarmed the usual rhythm of these events. Trump stayed off to the side of the podium. Arms still folded, his body language wasn't the usual showmanship. He wasn't leaning into the mic or smirking at the crowd. He was watching. Studying her, Jasmine remained in place just under the lip of the stage. She wasn't posing. She wasn't scanning for applause. She looked almost relieved, like saying those words had been more about getting them out than scoring points. Then slowly, a clap started from the back right corner. Hesitant to one or two, hands at first, then a few more, not a standing ovation. Not even close, but it was enough to break the silence. Trump stepped forward again, cutting into the moment. "All right," he said she had her say. "That's America, folks, even when you don't want to hear it." His tone was half sharp, half dismissive, but even he knew something about the energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't the fiery confrontation people were expecting. No one had yelled. No one had been dragged out. And yet somehow it hit harder than most of the shouting matches these events usually turned into. Then someone else stood up. Middle row, late 40s, red golf shirt with a small Texas flag on the sleeve. "Congresswoman," he said loud and clear. "I don't agree with you on much, but you said that better than most people ever have respect." She didn't smile. She just nodded once. Simple and clean. Trump blinked, clearly caught off guard. He raised a brow and turned slightly toward the man. "Well, aren't you full of surprises today?" Trump said with a quick laugh that didn't quite land. Then just like that, it started slipping back into normal. The moderators on the side stage whispered into their mics, trying to figure out whether to proceed with the panel or let the moment breathe. Reporters rushed to upload their clips, and security still hovering near the wall. Finally relaxed, Jasmine Crockett stepped back to the wall, giving space she wasn't escorted out. No one blocked her. She found an empty chair near the exit and sat calm and silent again. Not smug, not rattled, just present. But the attention hadn't left her yet. A reporter leaned over the press rope and whispered to a nearby aide, "Is she going to talk to the press?" "After. Does she have a statement?" No answer on stage. Trump shifted uncomfortably. For the first time that day, the spotlight wasn't on him, and it wasn't because of something he did. It was something someone else had said, in his house, on his time. He adjusted the mic well. "I think we've all had our civics lesson for the day." He said, "Now, can we get back to the part where we talk about actually fixing the country?" There were chuckles, applause, picked back up. The room wanted its rhythm back, but it wasn't quite there. Because right before Trump could launch into his talking points again, someone else called out, not angrily, not disruptively. "Why don't you respond to what she said?" Gasps, phones lifted again. Trump froze. He looked toward the crowd, trying to find who said it. But the voice had come from a cluster in the center, and no one stood to take credit. He gripped the sides of the podium, eyes scanning. "I don't need to respond," he finally said. Voice clipped. "She's got her opinion, I've got mine." And I was invited. A few claps, half-hearted, some laughter. Then Jasmine did something unexpected again. She stood up, walked slowly back toward the side aisle, and instead of heading for the door, she turned around to face the crowd again. "I didn't come here for attention," she said plainly. "But maybe some of you came here needing to hear something different. Not better. Not perfect, just different." And with that, she left quietly. No cameras following. No security flanking her. She simply walked out. The same way she came in. But what happened inside that ballroom didn't stay there for long. By the time Jasmine Crocker reached the end of the hallway and stepped into the sunlit side lot behind the convention center, her phone had already buzzed 7 times. No calls, just text. Journalists, a staffer, 2 colleagues from the House. She glanced at it, but didn't respond. Not yet. Her head was still spinning, though her face didn't show it back inside the building. The panel tried to regain its footing. Trump leaned hard into his script. Immigration border control crime rates in blue states, but it was like driving on a road with the wrong tires. The energy wasn't quite there. Even the crowd's reactions felt a little delayed, as if people were still mentally back in that brief silence when she spoke. What made it hit so hard wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. No theatrics, no slogans, just steady words spoken plainly like someone who was tired of yelling and even more tired of being ignored by the time the summit wrapped and the crowd spilled back into the lobby. Talk of her entrance had already gone viral. People huddled near the escalators, replaying the clips on their phones. Attendees who hadn't even been in the room were asking to see the footage. It wasn't dramatic in the traditional sense, but it held weight. Real weight, the kind you feel long after the event ends. 2 hours later, the first video clip hit Twitter. It was grainy shot from an iPhone behind the press row, but it captured everything. Her walking in Trump's reaction. Her short speech, the man in the red golf shirt speaking up, shirt. Within 10 minutes, it had over 12,000 likes. The comments came fast. Didn't expect to agree with Jasmine Crockett today. But wow. Respect. This is how you change minds. Not with noise, with clarity. Trump didn't know what to do. She had him standing there with his mouth half open. Was this planned? If it was brilliant. Texas just got interesting by Nightfall Cable News, had picked it up, not just the networks you'd expect, but all of them. One station ran the headline, Congresswoman Sparks Unscripted, Moment of Unity in Divided Room. Another called it an unexpected display of political courage, but the reactions weren't all praise. Some far-right commentators slammed her as an opportunist, accusing her of staging the moment to gain traction. Ahead of midterms, one talk show host claimed it was a Democratic stunt. Come on, he barked, you don't just walk into a Trump event unless someone wants you to be seen. Still, something about that claim didn't hold up, because if it had been staged, it would have felt louder, more polished. It didn't. It felt like a person walking into a space she didn't belong in, asking for just one shot to be heard, and doing it without shouting at her home in Dallas. Later that evening, Jasmine finally sat down with her team. I didn't expect it to go like that. She said you didn't expect applause either. Her aide replied, but you got some. I wasn't looking for applause, Jasmine said, rubbing her temples. I just wanted them to look at me and see a human being, not a soundbite, not an enemy. Her press manager, a sharp-witted guy from Garland named Reuben Sloan, shook his head as he scrolled through Twitter. People are calling it a turning point. He said even folks who hate politics are reposting it. Jasmine looked up, suddenly tired. That's the saddest part. She said all I did was ask for 60 seconds without screaming. And now it's a national headline. Reuben paused. Maybe that's what people were waiting for. Just someone to not scream, but while her team tried to manage the wave, another story had already started forming behind the scenes back at the convention center. The energy hadn't returned to normal, and maybe it wasn't going to. What started as a day built around political certainty had taken an unexpected detour into something more personal. People didn't walk out talking about tax reform or the usual red versus blue narratives. They talked about her about that minute of silence, about the faces in the crowd when she said, "We're not enemies." What really stuck with folks wasn't the applause, but what happened right after. During a short break between panels, a small group had gathered near the coffee station. People from different parts of the state, ranchers from Amarillo, retired educators from Plano, and a pair of young veterans from El Paso. No one was yelling. No one was filming. They were just talking. One of the vets, a guy named Jonah Krill, leaned against a column, arms crossed. I'm a Trump guy. He said always have been, but she wasn't wrong the way she carried herself. Man, it got to me, the retired teacher beside him. Ruth Ashby nodded slowly. She reminded me of my sister. Ruth said stubborn as anything but kind firm. Just wants to be heard. Jonah shrugged. I didn't agree with her, but I respected her. Maybe that's where we start. Ruth replied, respect, not agreement. Nearby, a younger woman in a MAGA cap listened but didn't speak. She looked unsure, like she didn't want to admit something out loud, but it was working on her too. Even in the main conference room during the next panel, the undercurrent of what had happened stayed alive. The moderators tried to shift focus back to economic development in Texas. But, one of the speakers, State Senator Colin Greer, couldn't help himself. I wasn't planning to address this, he said mid-discussion. But I feel like if we just move on like that moment didn't happen. We're pretending he looked out over the room. Congresswoman Crocker showed courage. Whether you like her or not, and whether you like me or not, I think courage still matters in politics. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Honest people weren't clapping out of habit. They were clapping because someone had finally acknowledged the elephant in the room not long after. Something else unexpected happened outside in the vendor lot, where food trucks were lined up. Crockett ran into a small group of attendees as she made her way to her car. She could have kept her head down. She could have ignored them. Instead, she stopped when she heard someone say her name, Congresswoman. She turned to see a man in a gray polo and Wrangler jeans jogging toward her. He looked cautious, like he wasn't sure if he'd be welcomed. I just wanted to say, I didn't come here to listen to anyone from your side, he said, catching his breath. But I did, and I'm glad I did. Jasmine studied him for a beat, unsure what to expect next. My name's Kenton McBride. I run a roofing company in Temple voted red every election since I was old enough. But what you said, it got to me. He stuck out his hand. She shook it. You listened. She said, that's more than most people try to do. Behind them, 2 more people wandered over, including the woman who had spoken up inside, the one who first said, let her speak. Her name was Teresa Givens, a grandmother former nurse, hadn't voted blue since Bill Clinton. I just wanted you to know you weren't alone in there, Teresa said, smiling. I didn't agree with all of it, but I was proud you showed up anyway. Jasmine's voice caught in her throat for a moment. Thank you, she said quietly. And maybe it was that stillness again, that strange, slow calm she carried, that made even her critics lower their voices. But not everyone outside that building was ready to have the same kind of conversation inside the private lounge backstage. Trump paced. He didn't like being caught off guard, and he especially didn't like losing control of a room he was supposed to own. Who the hell cleared her? He snapped, glaring at one of his aides. She wasn't on the list. Not on the speaker roll, not on anything. The aide, a younger guy with nervous energy and a poorly hidden sweat stain under his collar, stammered, We think she came in on reprompt. Bell's credentials, sir. Technically, she was invited as a guest. Technically, Trump scoffed. You know, who else gets in on a technicality? Hackers, criminals, I want names. I want to know who thought that was a good idea. He stopped pacing, then turned toward the small monitor that was still playing footage from the event. Jasmine's face was frozen on screen. Mid-sentence, clear and unflinching. Trump stared at it for a moment. Then she was too calm. You see that? Not even a tremble. That wasn't off the cuff. That was written planned. The aide didn't answer. And what about the crowd? Trump barked. Some of our people were clapping. What the hell was that? They were just reacting, sir. It caught everyone off guard. Exactly my point. He grabbed a bottle of water from the table and took a long drink, trying to regain the upper hand, even if only with himself nearby. His longtime advisor, Alan Rensley, known for saying things others wouldn't dare, finally chimed in. Look, Alan said you didn't lose the crowd, but you didn't control it either that moment. It's everywhere now. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, even TikTok. People aren't talking about policy. They're talking about. Her Trump frowned, lips tight. She's not the future. He said she's noise. Alan shrugged. Maybe, but noise travels fast. Trump waved him off and sat down heavily on the leather sofa. She played the game differently. Alan continued. Didn't yell, didn't accuse, just showed up and acted like she belonged. There was a long pause. Then Trump leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said something that surprised even his team. She had the room for a second. I'll give her that. Alan blinked. you respect what she did. Trump didn't answer directly. He just stared at the screen, now looping news coverage of the speech. I respect strategy, he said, doesn't mean I won't tear it down outside his campaign. Staff scrambled to prepare a statement, unsure of what line to take. Dismiss her as a political stunt, paint her as an intruder, or ignore it altogether, and hope it burned out in 48 hours. But ignoring wasn't really an option anymore. The clip had already made the rounds on prime time. It was featured on Newsline Weekly. Then Front Point Live, and even a soft-spoken reaction from a conservative podcast host, went viral. She didn't flip the room, the host said, but she reminded the room there's still a difference between strength and volume. Meanwhile, Trump's social media team tried to shift attention back to familiar ground economic numbers, border footage, fuel prices, but every third reply still included a screen grab of Jasmine standing alone in the aisle. Hand calmly raised, his base wasn't turning on him. Not even close. But they weren't unified in how to respond either. Some praised him for allowing her to speak, spinning it as a sign of strength. Others said he should have cut her off. Still. Others questioned why no one challenged her right there and then. And that fragmentation, that uncertainty. Trump hated it because whether or not Jasmine Crockett meant to, she'd done something few had managed in the past year. She'd made him react. Not by force, not with fury, but by calmly stepping into a space he dominated and asking for a minute, just a minute, and it worked. But outside the building, the internet wasn't just reacting. It was spinning the story in every direction imaginable by the time the Texas sun had set behind the skyline. Jasmine Crockett's name was trending in 4 major cities and counting. It wasn't just political corners. Talking This Had Gone Wide, fast people who'd never watched a congressional hearing in their life were now quoting her minute-long speech on Instagram stories and Facebook posts, influencers with nothing to do with politics. Fashion, bloggers, fitness trainers, even a guy known for raiding barbecue were sharing clips, adding captions like, "This is how you speak in a room that wasn't built for you." One edit stood out. A TikTok user had cut her speech over a slowed-down instrumental track, ending with a line from the man in the red golf shirt saying, "Respect, the video hit 2 million views in 8 hours. But for all the praise, the backlash came just as quickly. She staged it, publicity stunt. She's grandstanding for the camera. A clip from a conservative talk show was quickly making rounds. The host, pointing at the camera, saying, 'Wake up, people. This was theater. Nothing more.' You think she just walked in without coordination. Someone wanted this to go viral, and it did. And then came the trolls. Anonymous accounts dug into her voting record. Others attacked her appearance. A few spread false rumors, saying she'd shoved her way in or threatened staff. None of it held up the event. Security footage leaked by someone inside showed her walking in calmly, badge in hand, passing through the metal detector. Like anyone else still, the narrative was dividing fast. Cable news networks scrambled to keep up. Some invited her onto their shows. Others debated whether giving her airtime was validating a breach of decorum. A guest commentator on a popular show said this wasn't brave. It was performative activism in its most polished form. But then something odd happened. People who normally stayed out of political discourse, nurses, truck drivers, teachers, started posting long, heartfelt takes. One Facebook post from a man named Brent in Lubbock stood out. "I was at that summit. I voted Republican all my life. I've got a Trump bumper sticker on my F-150. But when that woman spoke, something in me paused. I didn't agree with everything, but I listened. Maybe we all need to shut up for a second and start listening again." The post went viral. Jasmine herself quietly liked it. Meanwhile, her staff was trying to contain the flood. Her inbox had ballooned with invitations, interviews, podcasts, speaking engagements. Some were genuine, others smelled like traps and the threats. Well, those were there too. Enough to get Capitol Police involved, enough that Ruben, her press manager, started carrying around a folder labeled just in case she stayed quiet through most of the first day. No tweet storm, no press conference, just a short statement released by her office. I asked for 60 seconds in a room where I wasn't expected. I spoke. That's all the rest is noise, but silence has its own way of keeping people talking. And in that vacuum, the public kept interpreting the moment for themselves. One late night host cracked a joke. Crockett walked into a Trump event with more calm than a yoga instructor on chamomile, and somehow she's the threat. The line got a big laugh, but there was truth underneath the humor. People weren't sure what to make of it because it didn't fit into the usual media boxes. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't accused, she hadn't even stayed to take questions. She just asked for 1 minute, and now, whether she wanted to or not, she'd become a symbol of something much bigger. But inside political offices across the country, what mattered wasn't how the public felt. It was how the party machines would respond on the second floor of a modest office building in Arlington. The fluorescent lights burned late into the evening. The Democratic Regional Caucus team had been meeting for hours. Phones on silent coffee, lukewarm laptops scattered across the table. Jasmine Crockett's name came up every 5 minutes, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with concern. She's got guts, said Miriam Noland, a senior strategist who'd worked 3 presidential campaigns. But let's not kid ourselves. This just put a target on her back, across from her party organizer. Dev Patel leaned forward. Yeah, but what if that target turns into a spotlight? People are watching independents, even some moderate conservatives. We'd be stupid not to harness that momentum. Sure, Miriam shot back, but that's assuming she wants to be part of something bigger. She hasn't returned a single call from National. Yet, she will said. Dev. She just lit a match in the middle of a thunderstorm. She's probably still figuring out how loud the thunder is. Meanwhile, a few hundred miles east, in a quiet office in Tulsa, another group was having a very different conversation. The GOP's regional media coordination team, tense and on edge, was sorting through footage, social media reactions, and internal polling data. She made him look flat-footed, said Julian Cross, a comms advisor known for shaping hardline narratives. We can't afford that twice. She was invited, another staffer muttered, by a Republican. No less, and that's the part we bury. Julian snapped, we don't give that an inch of oxygen. As far as our base knows, she walked in off the street. The staffer frowned, but she didn't. There's footage, clear footage of her entering with a badge. Truth doesn't trend, Julian said coldly. Emotion does, back in Dallas. Jasmine sat alone in her living room, still dressed in the same white blazer from the summit. A cup of tea sat untouched on the coffee table. Her phone kept lighting up with messages she wasn't ready to answer. She glanced at a voicemail transcription from her mother. You did good? Baby, don't let them twist it. You spoke like a woman raised, right? She smiled faintly, but even that moment didn't last long. A knock at the door pulled her back. It was Reuben. He stepped in, sat without asking, and opened his laptop. We need to talk about the invites. He said there's a town hall in Oklahoma that wants you next week. PBS is requesting a one-on-one, and believe it or not, someone from Fox wants to do a segment. She didn't answer right away. I didn't do it for this, she said. I just couldn't sit through another one-sided speech about what real Americans want, like I wasn't one. Reuben nodded, and you didn't scream to prove it. That's why it worked. They sat in silence for a minute. Do you regret it? He finally asked. Jasmine took a breath. I regret that it felt rare. I regret that telling the truth quietly is considered radical. Now upstairs, a light buzzed from her guest room. Her niece was staying over asleep with the television still running on the screen. They were replaying the clip for the 4th time in 20 minutes. The anchor's voice trailed through the walls. Unusual calm, a rare political moment that left the crowd and even the former president without a quick response somewhere in Washington. A paid manager scribbled down ideas for a campaign ad. Somewhere in Florida, a donor pulled funding from a candidate who had clapped for her and in a dozen political circles across the country, one question floated quietly beneath the surface. If 1 minute of clarity can shake a room like that, what would 5 do? But while the strategists and speechwriters circled the moment, Jasmine was already looking past it. Toward the part that came next 2 mornings later, Jasmine Crocker sat in the corner of a small cafe in Oak Cliff. Her hood pulled halfway over her head, she had hoped to steal a quiet hour before the interviews began. Before her phone started buzzing again, before the next wave of opinions tried to define who she was or what that moment had been. But quiet never lasts long when the country decides you've become something symbolic. A barista recognized her. First, nodded, said nothing. Then a young woman in scrubs came in, hesitated near the register, and finally walked up to Jasmine's table. Are you... Ugh. She started, unsure. Jasmine looked up, tired but polite. I am. The woman smiled, eyes glassy. I watched your clip 3 times yesterday. My dad's a trucker. He's never voted for anyone but Trump, but when he heard what you said, he got real quiet. He just said, she's got guts. Reminds me of your grandma. Jasmine blinked, not expecting that. The woman placed a folded note on the table. He doesn't do social media, so he asked me to write something for you. She walked away before Jasmine could say thank you. The note was simple. I don't agree with you, but I'd listen to you. That's more than I can say. For most, later that afternoon, she sat down for an interview with a local station. The journalist Shelby Dunn had been covering Texas politics for over 20 years. She wasn't looking for drama, just truth. I've been in a lot of rooms like that, Shelby said, recorder in hand, but I've never seen one stop the way that room did for you. Jasmine took a moment before answering. I wasn't trying to stop anything. I just wanted to show up and say what I never hear at these things, that it's okay to disagree without thinking someone hates the country. Shelby raised an eyebrow. Were you scared? Jasmine looked away briefly. I was aware, she said, of the risk of how it might be seen, of the fact that I was alone, but scared, not really. I've been in far smaller rooms with far louder men. She smiled softly. What scared me more was what would have happened if I stayed quiet. If I sat there and let that moment slip by, the conversation turned serious. Do you think the response would have been the same if you'd shouted, if you'd gone on the attack? Jasmine didn't even pause. No, people would have turned away. That room wasn't built for my anger. It was barely ready for my presence. But when I didn't come in swinging, they had to choose between listening or walking out. And most of them, they stayed. Shelby leaned back. And what? Now Jasmine sighed. I don't want to become a moment. I want this to be a start. If people walked away thinking, maybe I should listen before I assume, then that's enough for me. Across the country, responses kept flooding in from both sides. A pastor in Nebraska invited her to speak a school in Arizona, asked if she'd send a message for their civics class. A group of veterans in Ohio posted a video thanking her for showing restraint when you could have shown fire. But the criticism kept coming too. She's just another media puppet. She's selling calm like it's a brand. She walked into a lion's den and acted like it was a brunch spot. Still, she didn't flinch because something had shifted, and not just for her. In conversations across kitchen tables, barbershops, union halls, and gas station counters, people weren't asking whose side was she on. They were asking why did it feel so rare to hear someone speak like that? And maybe that was the bigger story. Not her courage, not her politics, but the fact that we'd all grown so used to shouting, that quiet suddenly felt brave. But even Jasmine knew the moment wouldn't last unless someone picked it up and carried it forward. 3 weeks later, the headlines had moved on. The story no longer LED the news cycle. A few interviews aired, a few think pieces were written, and political panels tried to milk one last round of takes before pivoting to the next firestorm. But something about what happened in that Dallas ballroom kept hanging around, quietly, persistently. Not because it was explosive, but because it was different in church basements and city council meetings. People brought it up without being asked. A pastor in Topeka referenced it. In a sermon about humility, a debate teacher in Fresno asked her class what made the room stop for her. Was it the message or the way she delivered it? And in a diner in Lafayette, Louisiana, a retired mechanic named Howard McClure told his buddies that woman didn't even raise her voice, and somehow she made half the room sit up straighter. I can't stop thinking about that in a time when volume often wins over value. Crocker had cut through the noise by refusing to play the game the usual way, and still she wasn't celebrating. She was back in her district walking through neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and front yards full of stories. She met with teachers, held a listening session at a community center, and talked with small business owners. Still trying to crawl out from under pandemic debt, her team begged her to ride the momentum, national press, big platforms, fundraisers, but she chose to stay local. Let people know I'm still here, she told Reuben. Let them know I didn't turn into a headline. I'm still a neighbor. It would have been easy to chase the fame. The features, the speaking tours, but she knew better. She knew the country didn't need another viral moment. It needed something deeper. It needed examples. Not perfect ones, just real ones. And, though she never said it out loud, she understood the responsibility. Now sitting on her shoulders, once you show people a different way to be heard, they start expecting more from you and from everyone else. Still, the pushback never stopped. Pundits accused her of softening her message to win over centrists. Party operatives questioned if she'd gone off brand. One high-ranking official even told her, "You're a Democrat. You're supposed to fight fire with fire." But that wasn't the lesson she took from that moment in Dallas, because that room had proved something she'd always believed, but rarely saw. People don't always need a hero. They need a pause, a window, a second, to reconsider, and sometimes that only comes when the shouting stops. Long enough for a voice like hers to break through in her final interview. Before going quiet again, a young reporter asked, "What do you want people to remember about that day?" Jasmine sat with the question for a long time. "I want them to remember what it felt like when nobody was yelling." She said, "I want them to remember that just for a minute, a room full of people who didn't agree on much still listened to each other." The reporter nodded. "And what would you say to someone who feels like speaking up isn't worth the risk?" Jasmine looked right into the camera. "I'd say silence is a risk too, and the longer we pretend that only the loudest voices matter, the more we lose the people who actually have something worth saying." Outside the studio, her car waited in the lot, engine running, another meeting, another neighborhood, another face at the door with questions she couldn't answer. In sound bites, but she was ready, because this wasn't about viral clips or strategy boards. It was about showing up every time, even in rooms where the odds weren't in your favor. Especially then, she opened the door, took a breath, and stepped out into the noise again, willing to risk everything for just one more quiet moment. And maybe that's the message we all needed. Not to be louder, but to make our words matter more. If this story moved you even just a little, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes one voice spoken calmly at the right moment can shift everything.